Inuyasha is a series that I love, and my love for it has been revived and revitalized by the release of its delightful sequel, Yashahime Princess Half-Demon. I was brainstorming about what topic I should cover for my next video, but I kept getting distracted with this series, and I was rewatching the old show and non-stop theorizing about the new one, all that good stuff. And so I decided if I'm going to be in such an obsessive mindset right now, I might as well take advantage of that and make a giant video essay and talk about it for as long as I want and just get it all out of my system. So brace yourselves, this might be a big one, at least for me. By the way, if my phrasing hasn't made it clear yet, I'm specifically discussing the anime in today's video, so not the manga. They are relatively similar, but the pacing is different, and of course the anime has some filler where the manga doesn't, and some edited down moments that the manga explored in more detail. I might do a video talking about the manga specifically at some point, but for now, just gonna be looking at the anime. Inuyasha is a story that begins with a small village being attacked by someone who the villagers refer to as Inuyasha. The young dog-eared man steals a jewel from the village before attempting to flee, but he is shot by a sacred arrow from the village priestess and is pinned to a tree. The arrow makes Inuyasha fall into an unnatural sleep, and the priestess, Kikyo, is left mortally wounded. Before she takes her last breath, she orders the jewel to be burned with her body so that it may never cause misfortune again. Famous last words, unfortunately. As the fire consumes the priestess's body, we cut to modern day. It is here that we are introduced to Kagome, our female lead and resident bored teenager. Kagome lives on a shrine, but she doesn't feel much attachment to the spiritual lifestyle her grandfather is so passionate about. She's a normal girl who's more concerned with spending time with her friends and doing well in her classes. So it's a bit of a shock for her when, while searching for the family cat, a demon goes and pops right on out of the well and drags her down with it. The demon proclaims that Kagome possesses the Jewel of Four Souls, and when Kagome tries to push the creature away from her, a strange light comes from her body that blasts the demon away from her. And when she stumbles out of the well, she realizes that something is very wrong. She's in a forest she doesn't recognize, and her home is nowhere in sight. Spotting the familiar figure of the sacred tree, she heads for it, and is struck by yet another surprise. Inuyasha's sleeping form, still pinned by the sacred arrow. Kagome is consumed with the very natural urge to pet the dog, but you gotta ask permission first, that's just manners, girl. What if he's skittish or something? She is brought back to the village and is introduced to the village priestess, Kaede, and she comes to the correct conclusion that while traversing the well, she somehow also traveled through time to feudal-era Japan, which, you know, everyone's been there, right? Kaede also observes that Kagome looks exactly like Kikyo, the fallen priestess and Kaede's elder sister. Which, she doesn't really look that much like Kikyo in my opinion. They look like they could be sisters, but I certainly wouldn't call them twins, and certainly not indistinguishable from each other. You have this unusual situation where all of the characters in the show are like, wow, you guys are identical, with your completely different hair and different skin tone, different eye shape, yada yada. It's nitpicky, I know, but by the billionth time that someone is like, aha, hello there, Kikyo, it starts to feel a little bit silly. Anyways. Kagome doesn't have very long to process her new situation, as the centipede demon that attacked her is now destroying the village. Realizing that she is its target, Kagome runs back to the forest where she emerged, and the demon pursues her as she hopes. She doesn't really have a plan here, she just doesn't want the villagers to die because of her. As Kagome approaches the sacred tree once more, Inuyasha finally awakens from his 50-year-long slumber, but is unable to free himself from the tree. And when Kagome appears before him, he mistakes her for Kikyo, to her annoyance. Kagome is attacked once more by the centipede demon, who takes a big chomp out of her side that, despite seeming pretty deep, doesn't seem to actually hurt her that much. She's running around just fine after this attack. From this wound emerges the sacred jewel that Kikyo had sought to destroy. Upon eating the jewel, the centipede's power increases exponentially, and Kagome has no choice but to break the seal on Inuyasha to save everyone. Despite the centipede's power-up, Inuyasha reveals his immense strength by swiftly taking care of the foe that the villagers had barely managed to scratch. Of course, he then immediately attacks Kagome in his attempt to take the sacred jewel once more. Fortunately, Kaede manages to bind him with the beads of subjugation, which allow Kagome to give Inuyasha the command to sit. Now unable to attack Kagome, Inuyasha settles into a strange role where he just sort of lurks near her, hoping he'll get his hands on the jewel another way. But he isn't the only demon with that strategy. As Kagome tries to figure out how she can return to her own time, she's taken captive by a crow that has made itself a nest inside of a dead bandit. The crow escapes with the jewel. Kagome, as it turns out, is not the master of archery that Kikyo was, to Inuyasha's chagrin. However, she is clever, and when she sees that the demon has the ability to reform its body, she uses the ability against it to guide her arrow true. It works a little too well. Oh, that's okay. We could just glue it back together. It's fine. It's fine. Oh, that's gonna take a lot more than glue. In that instant, the Jewel of Four Souls shatters into hundreds of tiny shards, which fly in every direction, and while it is in pieces, the jewel still possesses the ability to grant enormous power to the holder. So basically, there are now hundreds of tiny free power-ups scattered all over a land that is filled to the brim with demons and humans alike, willing to spill blood to get their hands on just one. Oops is a bit of an understatement here. And so begins Kagome and Inuyasha's unwilling partnership, as the pair must work together in order to keep the shards out of the hands of those who would use them for evil. Along the way, they make friends, have some family bonding time, and discover a spider pulling everyone's strings. The summary I just gave you was an overview of the first few episodes. If you are thinking that you may want to watch this show relatively blind, I'd suggest that you come back for this video later. I want to discuss this show's themes in detail, and some spoilers are a bit inevitable because of that, and especially when it comes to things like character arcs and developing relationships. I'll do my best not to reveal any huge spoilers or endgame moments, but I just wanted to give you that heads up. Kagome is an energetic, quick-witted, and sharp-tongued girl, very in line with Rukimo Takahashi's brand of fiery female leads. She doesn't take kindly to being pushed around and can have outbursts of anger and irrationality, but she is also incredibly thoughtful and caring. She is very stubborn, and even when she is completely outmatched, she still tries to do the right thing. Kagome is very much the heart of the show. While Inuyasha has a great deal of trouble with communication, Kagome wears her heart on her sleeve and is much more open and welcoming to other people. And it's because of Kagome's friendliness and willingness to hear others out that the pair are able to gain any additional companions at all. Not that Inuyasha doesn't have his own charms once you get to know him, but he's quite wary around new people, and if he were on his own, his defensive posturing would probably chase away potential allies. Aside from being a more charismatic person than her fellow protagonists, Kagome has the added bonus of being the reincarnation of Kikyo. Thanks to that, she possesses immense spiritual power, which she becomes more and more proficient with throughout the series. Her combat skills are slow to grow, but it is very fulfilling to watch her progress and gain more confidence during the course of the show. Unfortunately, the burden of living in two different timelines can take a bit of a mental toll on Kagome, and her difficulty managing her time to do her schoolwork and making it to class and also trying to save the world is really stressful to her, and she has multiple breakdowns because of it. In fact, Kagome seems to handle the stress of battling evil demons better than she does exams, which the show absolutely and rightfully pokes fun at. Our other main lead, Inuyasha, initially comes across as quite the delinquent, but it becomes clear alarmingly fast that he's actually just a tsundere trying to act tough and aloof. He's rough-spoken and violent, but from the start, it never really comes across as though he's a bad person, and Kagome does a lot to pry him out of his shell. Inuyasha is quick to grow attached to the people around him and will do anything to keep them safe. He's just really bad at expressing himself, because he's had next to no experience with trusting people and letting them in, and the reason for that is pretty sad. Inuyasha is a half-demon, and in this world, children born to a demon and a human have a very rough time finding their place. In general, humans are terrified of demons. Most interactions humans and demons have involves the human being eaten, so humans aren't typically very receptive to interacting with someone who has clearly demonic traits. And on the other hand, most demons are very proud, and they view humans with disgust. A half-demon in their eyes is an inferior being that shouldn't exist. Inuyasha's demon father died when he was just a baby, and his human mother died while he was still a child. So, without anywhere to go or anyone to turn to, Inuyasha spent his childhood living in fear, running and hiding from demons and unable to rely on humans. He grew up believing that he would be unloved no matter where he went, and that the only means of gaining respect and safety was through power. Half-demons also have a huge weakness. One night per month, they lose their demonic powers and become ordinary humans. The day for each half-demon is different, and they do everything they can to keep that day a secret from everyone. For Inuyasha, his period of weakness falls on the night of the new moon, and it's a vulnerability that he resents for the fear and weakness that it brings. This is why Inuyasha has such a fixation on the sacred jewel. He hopes that with it he can become a full-blooded demon, and he'll never have to live in fear again. As he gains friends who he swiftly becomes extremely loyal to, his motivation shifts from wanting to be strong for his own sake to wanting to be strong enough to protect those he cares for. This pivot in goals is predictable, but nevertheless is an incredibly heartwarming thing to see. And for me, one of the biggest joys of this show is watching someone as closed off and hostile as Inuyasha learning to open up and realize that he is deserving of love and friendship. I also appreciate that this show takes absolutely every possible opportunity to play around with the whole dog thing. It's an easy joke, sure, but it's cute and it never fails to make me laugh. There's a lot of good stuff here, like how certain scents overwhelm him, being unable to handle spicy foods, which are bad for dogs, and the fact that his retainer is a flea. By far, my favorite joke is when Kagome throws a stick for him and he reflexively chases it, and then he's embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed, buddy. You can play fetch if you want to. Shippo is an interesting character because he's Inuyasha and Kagome's first traveling companion, unless you count Miyoga, which I don't. Dude is gone like half the time. And yet, he's a character that even people who like him, myself included, have a knee-jerk reflex to dismiss. Shippo is a kitsune and has a lot of very interesting trick magic as well as the ability to transform, but he's very young and he isn't physically very strong, so most of the time in important battles he's either transformed as a mount or hiding out on the sidelines. Most of the time, Shippo ends up being thought of as nothing more than comic relief, which, again, I am also guilty of that. But I did some thinking, and I have come to the conclusion that the role Shippo plays is a lot more than that. We encounter a full spectrum of human characters because our heroes frequently travel through human settlements, and we see far more of the human world than the demon world. So we have the opportunity to realize that the humans in this world are capable of both good and bad. But before Shippo joined the party, we had very few examples of demons that were capable of good. From the first time Kagome entered this world to Inuyasha's own brother, the demons that we saw were hostile and dangerous, beings who relentlessly sought out the sacred jewel to increase their power, or who attacked innocents without mercy. Shippo is important because he shows us that demons really aren't very different from humans. They are capable of great evil, but they are also capable of being selfless and good. Shippo introduces himself the same way most demons have so far, demanding the fragments of the sacred jewel that Kagome and Inuyasha carry. However, it's a joke. The being that is attempting to be menacing is clearly not a threat. And it's revealed that he doesn't want the shards just for the sake of achieving power. Shippo is an orphan. His father was murdered by demons, and the young Kitsune was hoping to get revenge. When his actions get Kagome kidnapped, Shippo is adamant that they have to save her, and he openly shows compassion and concern for her and other humans. Not only unwilling to hurt, but in many cases working to actively help humans, even complete strangers. We do eventually meet other demons who aren't all bad, but without Shippo, it might have seemed a little bit more out of left field. So yeah, sorry Shippo for dismissing you for so many years as just comic relief. Meet the king of controversy, butt toucher extraordinaire, and my childhood crush for some reason, Miroku. Miroku is a traveling monk who has a run-in with our heroes as he was also hunting the shards of the jewel. The party mistakes Miroku for a scoundrel, and he doesn't think a half-demon can be trusted with something like the jewel. The altercation might have gotten nasty, but fortunately Kagome catches on to the fact that Miroku attempts to protect the villagers, something a villain would never bother to do. And this assumption ends up being correct. Miroku, despite his less than savory habits, is a good man. We eventually learn that Miroku's many vices are due to the fact that he was raised by an old, immoral, but still kinda chill drunk after his father's death, and the man's bad habits rubbed off on him. But Miroku is a lot more than his flaws. He's very smart, arguably the brains of the team, and his presence is a calming influence. Humans were often very reluctant to talk to and give information to a team of a rough-mannered half-demon, a kitsune, and a girl wearing really strange, scandalous, leg-bearing clothing. But with a monk there, people who would ordinarily have been wary of the party now give them information freely. Miroku is also handy in a fight, pun intended. Not only does he have immense spiritual power, able to create barriers and purify with sacred sutras, but he is excellent in physical combat as well. By far, Miroku's strongest ability is due to his cursed hand. Miroku has a wind tunnel, a black hole in his hand that can pull in anything. He can decimate entire armies of demons in seconds. It's so powerful and effective that the main baddie literally has to carry around special poisonous insects just to ward off this human monk. That's pretty cool. The hand is called cursed for a reason though. Every year of Miroku's life, the hole grows wider. Eventually, if left unchecked for too long, the wind tunnel will consume him, in the same way it consumed his father and his grandfather. The only way to break the curse is to kill the one who placed it on his family to begin with, but we will get to that later. I have a hard time not being biased when it comes to Sango, by far one of my favorite characters in Inuyasha, but I will do my best not to gush too much. Sango is a demon slayer, and maybe one of the most tragic characters in the show, which is saying a lot considering the party consists primarily of orphans. While out on a hunt, her little brother Kohaku was possessed by a demon and slaughtered their entire team, their father included. He snaps out of it, but not before he's shot by guards trying to stop his rampage. Sango attempts to shield her brother and the two collapse in each other's arms. To the guard's shock, Sango proceeds to dig herself out of her own grave, somehow surviving the attack. She then receives even worse news. While her team was gone, the Demon Slayer village was attacked and there were no survivors. Unfortunately, she's also given the false information that the one who attacked the village was Inuyasha. This kind of misunderstanding happens a lot in the show, by the way. Fortunately, like with the situation with Miroku, they are eventually able to talk it out and learn the truth of what happened to the Demon Slayer village. Sango is a character riddled with tragedy, but while her past does shape her as a character, it does not define her. Sango is an incredible warrior, shown to be able to easily lift and throw a weapon as tall as she is. She is sweet and thoughtful and the best, and yeah, okay, there's that bias showing. In all honesty, Sango isn't a perfect person, which is good, because perfect people are boring people. It's later revealed that Kohaku has been revived, although under the control of a demon, and Sango makes poor decisions when it comes to her brother. She's normally a very rational person, but when it comes to him, reason flies out the window, and she can be very destructive to herself and those around her in her attempts to save him. She also eventually develops feelings for Miroku, but since this is a team comprised of lovable idiot children, she doesn't know how to actually talk to him, and so they do this song and dance where Miroku flirts with women, and Sango gets really mad at him, and he doesn't know why, because she also gets mad when he flirts with her. And it's like, guys, just talk to each other. How hard could it be? But then they do talk to each other, and they both admit that they like each other, and Sango's like, great, we're in love, and I'm a 10, so you'll stop being a piece of shit, right? And he's like, what if? No. And I scream. I do like the way Inuyasha and Kagome gossip about the two, again, like kids on a playground. These guys, man, they're just really lovable. And on that note, let's talk about the main team as a whole. This group dynamic is fantastic, and all of the characters play off each other in really interesting ways. You get the feeling that this is a solid group of friends. I'm not going to point fingers, but I'm sure you've seen shows where, once romantic pairings have been established, characters don't really interact in meaningful ways outside of their designated partner, and that isn't the case at all here. Sango and Inuyasha have a friendship that starts out almost as a rivalry, but that develops into intense mutual respect. Miroku is an excellent foil for Inuyasha, and the monk's cool-headedness allows Inuyasha the opportunity to reflect in a way that he would never do on his own. The two confide in each other a lot and are clearly best friends by the end. Shippo and Kagome are ridiculously cute together and always have each other's backs in fights, especially since they are the only ones on the team who aren't very good as close-range fighters. Inuyasha and Shippo spend 24/7 fighting and making fun of each other like a pair of particularly immature but still lovable brothers, and Sango and Kagome are practically sisters from the moment that they meet. It's just nice seeing these guys work together and grow to overcome their individual hardships as a unit. I also really like the designs for these guys. I like how everyone has a different primary color that makes them stand out. They all just look really good together. Moving on from the main squad, let's go back a little bit, because I mentioned earlier that Inuyasha has an older half-brother. Sesshomaru is a full demon, a fact that he is very proud of. He thinks humans are gross, half-demons suck, and by his judgment, even other demons are pretty lame compared to him. When Sesshomaru is introduced, he is framed as a straight-up villain, a real Raditz of a dude. Their father left each of his sons a sword, but Sesshomaru isn't a big fan of his, and he wants Inuyasha's sword, Tessaiga, instead. He tries to kill Kagome and almost kills Inuyasha multiple times, all the while belittling his brother for existing. But all of that changes when Inuyasha finally learns how to unleash the Wind Scar, a powerful technique that can slay 100 demons in a single strike. The attack nearly kills Sesshomaru, with only the power of his own sword, Tenseiga, saving him. You see, while Inuyasha has a sword of destruction, Sesshomaru is given a sword of healing that can bring someone back from death. It cannot harm a person by cutting them with it. Tenseiga can save 100 lives with one swing, which is why Sesshomaru didn't want it. What would someone with a cold heart want with a sword meant for preserving life? But the sword he resents saves Sesshomaru of its own will, allowing him to escape Inuyasha's attack alive, but so heavily wounded he's unable to move. And here is where we meet Rin, the catalyst for Sesshomaru's character development. Rin is an orphan who lost her ability to speak due to severe psychological trauma of witnessing her family being murdered by bandits. When she finds Sesshomaru, she insists on caring for him and bringing him food, even though he ignores her offerings. Apparently he doesn't eat human food. I don't know why he says this. I'm pretty sure this was an anime-only thing. Don't know what he actually eats, so I'll just decide that he subsists from photosynthesis because that makes me laugh. Sesshomaru does his best to remain his cool, indifferent self, but when Rin shows up with some bruises, he asks her what happened, and when she smiles because she's so happy that he cares, he's like, I was just asking. It's not like I don't care or anything. Eventually, Sesshomaru regains his strength and is about to leave and go do whatever he does. The dude has a tendency to just sort of wander around until the plot finds him, but something catches his attention. The scent of wolves and blood, and more specifically, Rin's blood. He follows the trail and, yeah, she's dead. And for the first time ever, Sesshomaru uses his sword to save a life. And also, he absolutely frames it as him testing the blade out and not as the act of compassion it obviously is. It's at this point that everyone watching has a sudden, abrupt realization that the handsome, dangerous villain is actually a handsome, tsundere antihero, and everyone who likes men fell head over heels in love, except for me, because I picked the pervert with the 5 head. Feel free to judge me. I am going to keep discussing the other characters, but while we're on the topic of Sesshomaru, I just wanted to highlight the fascinating parallels between him and Inuyasha. At first, they couldn't seem more different. Inuyasha is rough and crude and prone to rash decision-making and immature outbursts of anger. Inuyasha feels every emotion at 100% and he is never good at hiding that. Sesshomaru is dignified, his station is clearly above everyone else, and he has an iron grip on his feelings and almost never visibly emotes. But the longer we get to know Sesshomaru, the more we realize that he is just like Inuyasha. He's just actually become all that Inuyasha wanted to be. Sesshomaru isn't free of emotion and the burdens of caring, he just acts like he is, and that facade becomes transparent after Rin enters the picture. Sesshomaru never openly dotes or even visibly cares much for her. She has to find her own food, and he never really invites her to come with them, she just follows of her own will. But suddenly, she's wearing a beautiful new kimono when she was previously just wearing rags. She's riding his mount, and when she's in trouble, he's suddenly there. And while Rin is the first time we get to see Sesshomaru's compassion, she is far from the last. We see many instances of Sesshomaru saving people and caring for people. There is one scene in particular that I am not going to show here because it's pretty late in the anime, but to put it vaguely, we get to see Sesshomaru just being there for someone in their final moments, and it's really beautiful and sad. And just that willingness to be by someone's side when they need it shows just how far he's come as a person since the day he met the little girl in the woods. In an arc that perfectly parallels his brother who he started out despising, Sesshomaru by the end is no longer simply searching for power just for the sake of it. Instead, he uses his strength to protect. And while he never opens up to the extent Inuyasha does, it is equally as heartwarming to watch his icy heart thaw. Since Rin's backstory and character are so heavily intertwined with Sesshomaru's, I already covered a lot of stuff about her in this section, but there are a few additional details that I did want to mention. One of my favorite things about Rin is the way she bounces back despite all of the horrible things that happen to her. When she's introduced, she's lost the ability to speak from trauma, and she died, but the next time we see her, she's as chatty as can be, and extremely upbeat for that matter. You quickly realize that all Rin really needed to thrive was to be in an environment where she's not constantly being beaten down, the poor thing. And oh my gosh, is she a breath of fresh air when it comes to Sesshomaru's party. Previously, it was just him and Jokin, the little yes man who follows him around everywhere. The two were a typical villain-lackey duo, with Sesshomaru being the cool, competent one and Jokin being the one to make Sesshomaru mad constantly. It wasn't bad, but I would be hesitant to call it a remotely deep dynamic, or one that provoked many interesting character moments. But the moment you add this little ball of sunshine into the picture, things start to look very different. Suddenly, Jokin is forced to take on the role of a permanently exhausted caretaker, which is hilarious, and Sesshomaru has to think of someone other than himself. When we cut to Sesshomaru's party, no longer are we watching a duo making evil plans or massacring humans. Now we get songs and flower picking and playing games. It's the best. Thank you, Rin, for making these two transform into actually compelling characters and not a pair of reoccurring villains of the week. Jokin is a little shit, but a lovable little shit, and one that becomes increasingly lovable the more you get used to him. When he was first introduced, I just wanted him to die. He was so obnoxious, and even his own boss didn't like him very much, but like a little parasitic vine, he starts to grow on you. His charisma is absolutely trash. No matter what the situation is, he is almost guaranteed to say the wrong thing. You need some quiet? Jokin is in a chatty mood. You want emotional support? Don't worry, Jokin is here to talk about your inevitable mortality. He's such a rat. But at the same time, watching him grow to care for Rin is really something special. You get the image of a grouchy little old man who suddenly has to take care of this kid, and it's a very Pixar-like dynamic. Jokin never becomes better at interacting with people, but as you see more of his soft side, he becomes a lot more likable. And speaking of characters who eventually become more likable, watch out, because here comes Kikyo crawling out of her tomb and into your heart. Yeah, that priestess who died in the intro, well, now she's undead, and boy oh boy. Continuing in our sad parade of tragic misery backstories, Kikyo has had it a bit rough. Something that the opening scene neglects to explain is Kikyo's wounds. We see her bleeding out quickly, and they're the same reason that she died. A first-time viewer would assume the obvious. Clearly, Inuyasha attacked her before he stole the jewel. But if this were the case, why did Inuyasha seem so surprised when she shot him? And later, upon being freed from the sealing curse, why did Inuyasha assume that Kikyo was still alive? What happened between these two? Let's go back those 50 years before Inuyasha was sealed, and then back a little bit more. The sacred jewel was rediscovered by demon slayers. Wary of the jewel's power and not wanting it to fall into demon hands once more, the demon slayers brought the jewel to Kikyo, an extraordinarily powerful priestess with a gift of purification. Kikyo defended the jewel from many demons who sought it for its power, but there is one in particular that she didn't have the heart to kill. And you guessed it, it was Inuyasha. The first time she meets Inuyasha is on the new moon. Remember the night where his demon powers are sealed and he appears as an ordinary human? Because of this, when she meets him later, she's able to rightfully figure out that he is a half-demon. She is also the first person to see through the tough guy image that he's trying to portray and takes pity on him. Despite blatantly being stronger than he is, she refuses to kill him and begins to try and coax him into letting down his guard. She talks to him, they start spending time together, and then they become allies in protecting the sacred jewel. They develop a friendship, and eventually the two fall in love. The sacred jewel has the ability to take in both good and evil energy, and when the jewel is whole, it's possible for the jewel to grant wishes. Kikyo tells Inuyasha that instead of wishing to become a full demon, he could wish to become a human, and this would be considered an unselfish wish, and the jewel would disappear and Kikyo would be freed from her duties as a priestess. She and Inuyasha could live happily together for the rest of their lives. On the morning that the two had agreed on to make the wish, Inuyasha went to meet with Kikyo, but he was ambushed by the woman herself, or so he thought. From Kikyo's perspective, as she left with the jewel in hand, she was attacked by Inuyasha, who cut her down and walked away with the jewel after taunting her. As it turns out, both of these characters were misled by an individual who disguised themselves in a deliberate attempt to pit the couple against each other, and again, we'll discuss this in more detail in a bit. So, when Kikyo is revived, she finds herself unable to move on from her mental state right before her death. After all, she's basically a walking corpse at this point. Time doesn't move forward for her, so neither do her emotions. Even after learning that Inuyasha wasn't actually the one who killed her, she is unable to let go of that hatred she felt in her final moments. Kikyo becomes a really interesting character in the story. On the one hand, she is an antagonistic figure to Inuyasha and by extension, Kagome. Kikyo resents her reincarnation for having the chance at happiness that was stolen away from her. She tries to kill Inuyasha, she's manipulative, and she drives a wedge between our heroes on a frequent basis. But she's also tragic, and as later events show, despite everything, she is still capable of kindness and good. Despite her insistence that her soul cannot move on from the hatred that consumed it, Kikyo really comes into her own later on in the series, and while her presence never fails to produce some tension, she proves herself to be a surprisingly reliable ally and is responsible for saving the heroes on multiple occasions. I'm not sure if this is still the case anymore, as I try to avoid fandom shipping drama stuff with as wide of a berth as humanly possible so as to prevent myself from melting in the toxic waste, but back in the day of fanfiction.net and other similar cave paintings, things could get nasty when it came to Kikyo. People hated her, and they didn't understand why Inuyasha couldn't just let her go. After all, she's dead. Her existence is corrupted, and Kagome is right there, and she's clearly hurt whenever Inuyasha runs off to Kikyo. I do understand the frustration, because it's a sad situation. The show clearly wants you to feel bad for Kagome when she's left behind, knowing full well that if Kikyo is ever in danger, Inuyasha will drop everything and try and save her. But I just think that some of the takes I used to see about this topic were really shallow and refused to understand the nuance of the situation. It isn't in Inuyasha's nature to leave anyone to die, not even a stranger, half the time not even his own enemies. Of course he's going to help someone he cares about. Yes, it's messy, yes, it's complicated, and yes, that is very much the intended point. I think it's totally okay to not like Kikyo as a character. She does some pretty nasty things, especially in earlier seasons, but if the only reason why is because she's the other woman, you may be missing the point. For the last of the heroes, we have Koga, a speedy wolf demon enhanced by the sacred jewel shards he keeps embedded in his legs. Koga is very similar in nature to Inuyasha, minus the self-esteem issues since he is a full demon. Koga is proud, stubborn, and pretty much never listens to other people's advice, no matter how good it is. Koga is a likable enough character, but unfortunately, he's one of my less favorites. I don't hate him. I don't even really feel negatively towards him at all. I just feel like the story doesn't do as much with him as it could character-wise. The best thing by far about Koga is his relationship with Inuyasha, a bitter rivalry that shifts to begrudging respect and even friendship, because this show loves friendship almost as much as it loves romance. Koga is in pursuit of two goals. First, he wants the big bad dead in order to get his revenge for members of his wolf pack who were killed. And second, Koga wants to date Kagome. And I know, it may seem absolutely hypocritical of me to criticize love triangle stuff when I was just defending Kikyo, but I promise I have a reason for it. See, the thing is, this isn't so much of a love triangle as it is a love less than sign, because Kagome never, ever, not even once, seriously considers being with Koga. She's nice to him, but she straight up says she isn't interested in him romantically. So you have a situation where the two dumb boys are fighting over a girl, but without them taking into consideration the fact that one of them has absolutely no chance. So it ends up feeling like a waste of time when Koga shows up and proclaims his undying love, and Kagome's like, whatever you say, buddy, want some chips? And he's like, oh, a symbol of her affection. we're basically married now. It does lead to some funny moments, but more often than not, I found Koga-centric episodes to be the ones I was the least invested in. It feels like Rukimo Takahashi's writing tendencies from Ranma 1/2 resurfacing in a way that really feels out of place here. With the Kikyo love triangle, there's a lot of history and emotional baggage that makes the dynamic compelling on all sides. Kagome tries to understand Inuyasha's feelings even though they hurt her, and she is kind to Kikyo because she knows how much Kikyo means to Inuyasha. Inuyasha feels tremendous guilt for not being able to let go of Kikyo to make Kagome happy, and Kikyo is bitter and lonely because she knows that Inuyasha can't be with her, and that Kagome is the one he's destined for. And these moments can work well for comedy or drama, depending on the scene, fueling both heartfelt conversations and ribbing from friends over the dysfunctional nature of the relationship. Again, I like the dude, and I really feel for him too. He lost a lot of friends, and him wanting vengeance is compelling and understandable, but I wish the love triangle stuff didn't feel so pointless. Fortunately, there aren't a ton of episodes dedicated to it. It's not like some constant irritating issue. And I feel bad having spent most of Koga's section complaining about him, so to make up for it, I will acknowledge that his design is great. Love that hair, dude. In theory, I could keep going on this section for a while. Inuyasha has a lot of characters who play important roles in the story, but I mainly wanted to give an outline of the 4 main hero factions of the show, so the main party, Sesshomaru and his companions, Kikyo and Koga. And while the latter 3 play occasional antagonistic or anti-hero roles, every single one of these factions share a common, unifying goal. They all hate Naraku. Naraku is the big bad of the series, and he is a phenomenal villain. The dude is a pitch-perfect main antagonist. You know that thing that so often happens in games and anime where the boss sits in the castle, ordering everyone else around, and it's like, why? You're so much stronger than everyone else. Why not get out there and do the work yourself? It makes sense from a story perspective. If Frieza showed up instead of Raditz, we would lose that slow build to an encounter with the big bad. I clearly need to do a Dragon Ball video at some point if I'm going to keep referencing it this much. So you understand why most stories don't do it, but it can lead to moments where it's like, okay, so you're immortal and all-powerful. Why do you keep sending out so many minions to do your bidding when you could just get out there and take care of it on your own? It's a nitpicky point, but it can be distracting sometimes, especially when those minions fail at their goal a lot. But in Inuyasha, Naraku is explicitly a coward. He uses cunning and trickery, puppets and distractions, manipulates people into doing his work for them, and using people against each other, and all the while he hides in the shadows. If he can avoid it, Naraku never gets his own hands dirty. He plays it so safe, it's almost ridiculous, hiding behind layers of poison and minions and barriers. If he can get a hostage, he'll take a hostage. Even when Naraku reasonably has the upper hand, he still takes absurd levels of precaution. He always has an escape route or a fall guy, and he has no sense of pride at all and will absolutely run away if he has to in order to survive. Something that makes Naraku especially great and compelling is that every single character has a personal beef with him. It isn't just about the fact that this dude will absolutely try and take over the world if he can. The story is a lot more personal than that. Starting at the beginning with Inuyasha and Kikyo, he is the reason for the tragedy that befell them. Naraku is a shapeshifter and took the forms of the couple in order to deceive them into thinking that they had been betrayed. The cursed wind tunnel in Miroku's hand, a family curse that Naraku placed on his grandfather, Sango's decimated village, murdered team, and possessed brother, Koga's dead wolf pack, all Naraku. Naraku kidnaps Rin to try and manipulate Sesshomaru, who responds by, very calmly, pursuing Naraku to the ends of the earth for all eternity because he is very much that guy. Shippo isn't really personally targeted, but the whole reason his father is dead is because of the sacred jewel, which, as previously mentioned, is entirely Naraku's fault that it even still exists. And Kikyo and Kagome both have to deal with Naraku's weird, creepy fixation on Kikyo, which he has like a we'll say crush on her, but that really feels like too nice of a word for it. I absolutely adore how personal and how nasty the interactions are between all of the characters and Naraku, since most of them wear their hearts on their sleeves and the one who doesn't still isn't great at hiding his obvious weakness. Naraku is really adept at getting into these guys' heads, but even so, he isn't omnipotent, and I think that's the key with making a character like Naraku work. If Naraku always won, if he always escaped without a scratch, it would be really frustrating to watch. But just as often as Naraku wins, he loses, and without a doubt, even more satisfying than Naraku being injured is when he's taken by surprise. He's so cautious and tries so hard to think ahead and account for everything that when the heroes can manage something that takes him off guard and ruins his plans, it's great and it's so rewarding. Just like with the heroes, there's a lot more than just Naraku as the villains, and there's a lot more I could say here. In particular, Kagura and Kohaku steal the show. Kagura is a really fun character to me. She's an offshoot of Naraku, bound to him by her heart, and she hates him for that. She's not a good person, but she is an interesting person, and one who you grow to feel sorry for and almost root for. All Kagura wants is freedom, and so even when she's fighting against the heroes, she's also secretly hoping that Inuyasha or Sesshomaru will be able to kill Naraku and she can escape from him. Kohaku barely counts as a villain, as he is being manipulated by the secret jewel shard that Naraku used to keep him alive, but the show really makes you care about this kid, and it's one of the biggest reasons why defeating Naraku is such a big deal, so that Kohaku has a chance of being saved. Since he spends so much time under Naraku's control, Kohaku doesn't really have a chance to change or develop as much as the other characters do, but he doesn't really need to, because his main purpose is to drive others forward in their own development, and it's more than just Sango who's affected by Kohaku. Kikyo, Sesshomaru, and even Kagura are all influenced by their interactions with him, and it's a really interesting dynamic to see. I think that's enough about the characters. Now let's get into the juicy stuff, the things I don't like about Inuyasha. It's not a lot, and it's certainly not enough for me to lower my opinion of the show as a whole, but I'm not going to pretend there's such thing as a flawless piece of media, except for Land of the Lustrous. Make season 2 already, you hacks. The biggest issue with Inuyasha overall is the pacing. The series loves taking its time, and this usually works in its favor because characters have plenty of time to develop, and the story has room to breathe and progress naturally, but sometimes events feel way more drawn out than they should, and it can really kill the tension. In my opinion, the absolute worst offender of this is the Tsubaki the Dark Priestess mini-arc, which flounders around for so long and wastes so much time that any good moments it has are ruined by the fact that you're turning to dust by the time it's gotten to the point. And it has this really out-of-place comic relief bit in the middle that would have been cute as its own episode, but as it is, it's incredibly frustrating to sit through. The final act, which is a separate series that wraps up the ending of Inuyasha, has the opposite problem, where some events that were explored more thoroughly in the manga are wrapped up much more quickly. This isn't totally a bad thing, as it did also trim some unnecessary fat, but I do feel a bit bummed out that some good character building was shaved down. We also have a tiny power creep issue when it comes to Inuyasha's sword. There is this reoccurring problem where it starts to seem like Inuyasha's power has plateaued, but he keeps needing to upgrade to Saiga in order to be able to face stronger opponents. Learning the Wind Scar and later the Backlash Wave makes sense, and feels like Inuyasha himself is becoming more masterful with the weapon. And the Red Tessaiga makes sense. Naraku is such a cheese lord that it makes perfect sense to seek out an upgrade specifically designed for breaking barriers, but after that, it started feeling a bit tired. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the dragon-scaled Tessaiga, I don't know. If you think that's cool, more power to you. I just wish the focus had been more on Inuyasha growing instead of his sword getting more bells and whistles on it. And finally, some of the comedy relies on tropes that can get a little bit old. So, it's a tale as old as time that people have criticized Inuyasha and Kagome's relationship as unhealthy, and honestly, I think that's a pretty bad faith take. Most of the aspects that are pointed out are like the beads of subjugation or the way they yell at each other, but it's slapsticky and silly. This is not the equivalent of someone hitting their spouse, guys. Take your big brains elsewhere. Winry throwing a wrench at Edward is a joke. Team Rocket blasting off into the sky is not causing them grievous bodily harm, and Inuyasha getting sit-boyed isn't that deep. It's a joke, and if you don't think it's funny, that's totally fine, but there really isn't anything more to it than that. And while I will defend that aspect of the humor, something that I can understand getting on people's nerves is Miroku and his entire cursed personality. He's a big old nasty pervert, which was all the rage in manga and anime at the time, but has since become really not socially acceptable. Hashtag Miroku is over party. Cancel Miroku. I wouldn't give it such a side eye if it weren't also not funny. Because again, context matters. Miroku being gross is framed as a joke. It's supposed to be funny because he's a holy man acting in an unholy way. Stop thinking about the Catholic Church. Stop, it's Buddhist. He's Buddhist. It's a different kind of creep. And nothing good ever happens to him because of it, and everyone else happily calls him out for it. But it's just literally never made me laugh. It's not funny. It only makes me groan and wish for death. It's like Brock from Pokemon, but on steroids. Every time a pretty girl shows up, it's like, oh no. And then Miroku's like, ooh, ladies. And it's just not funny. There's this bit that I hate more than anything. And it's this scene where Miroku and Sango are climbing a holy mountain. There's this really strong holy aura, and thinking bad thoughts can make you feel ill, so Miroku ain't doing too well. So he keeps trying to do his thing, but he can't because the mountain says consent is important, you freak. And I hate it. It's the least funny joke I've ever seen. He's like reaching for her butt, and he's like screaming that this time I will touch, and it's just... Although I will say, I was very like highbrow, like mustache twirling, this isn't funny when I was watching the scene, but now that I'm recounting it, I can't stop laughing, so I don't know, maybe I'm just a clown and it's actually great humor and whatever. Even though I'm a big baby and I kept complaining about it, I will say that these bits are very, very short. So again, the Brock from Pokemon thing, it's easy to ignore if you don't think it's funny. But enough of the bad, let's talk about the good. I've already mentioned the characters, how much I love them, and how their bonds help make them so incredibly compelling, but wait, there's more. The music is great, characters each have their own leitmotifs, and they all sound wonderful. Sango, Kikyo, and Rin's themes are my favorite, but they are all beautiful and convey the personality of each character so well. The background art is stunning. I think my favorite is the stuff we get to see in Mount Hakare. It's the sweeping views, they're breathtaking. I love the running gag of how nobody can really tell what kind of demon everyone else is at a glance, and then the later incarnation of that where an evil group of mercenaries, the Band of Seven, insist that Kohaku is a ninja, despite him repeatedly telling them that he isn't. Speaking of them, the Band of Seven, a great group. They're villains and they suck. They're super evil, but they're also funny and they share banter and have interesting relationships and dynamics with each other, and it makes them way more compelling than they'd be if they were just evil. I like how overpowered Sesshomaru is. It's always a treat. It's just fun getting to watch him blast through enemies that would normally give Inuyasha's party so much trouble. His aloof nature really balances that, because if he were as openly heroic as Inuyasha, there wouldn't be a show to watch. I love Kagome's family and how supportive they are of her unconventional lifestyle. They're just like, yeah girl, slay those demons, you got this, here's your lunch, love you. It's really cute and wholesome. I love Jinenji. I love him so much. He's sweet, and I want to garden with him, and I hope he gets everything he wants in life. I'm going to say that probably my favorite thing that I haven't already mentioned is the wonderful Inuyasha in the modern era episodes. These are all treasures. In any other anime, they'd be filler, but here it's perfect. Inuyasha is a great fish out of water, and these episodes lead to some incredibly funny moments. Like when Inuyasha has to go deliver Kagome her lunch while she's at school, and in the meantime, shenanigans ensue, and he ends up on the evening news. Or when Kagome brings home some dried demons and accidentally revives them by boiling them in water, and she and Inuyasha have to stop them while in the middle of a cultural festival, but he blends right in and can move around freely because there's a cosplay event and no one's looking at him twice. I think that's my favorite. I have a lot of favorites. Actually, no, I'm going off the script here because I can't believe I didn't mention this at all, and I must, because it's a joy. There's an episode where Shippo receives a challenge from another demon, and it starts out as though Shippo is going to have to fight someone really powerful, and he's very, very frightened because they're in the same clan of the demons that killed his father, and gosh, he's so afraid. But it turns out the demon in charge is just a little kid, and they end up having a stupid battle over crayons, and it's so dumb. It's so cute and dumb. And I'm going to wrap up the video here, because if I go on for too much longer, I'm just gonna start doing that. I'm just gonna keep going off script and just start listing episodes that I like. So I'm gonna stop. I absolutely recommend that you do give this show a look if this video convinced you at all. It's on Hulu, so you can go watch it there. And I just want to say thank you for your patience. I know that there was a bit of a gap between my last video and this one. There was a lot going on with the holidays. I got a new job. Things were chaotic. Stay safe, stay hydrated, love you lots, and see you next time. Guys, I'm having a real rough dilemma right now because Taco Bell brought back their nacho fries, and now literally all I want to eat for the rest of my whole life are nacho fries, and I can't do that for multiple reasons. I cannot do that. Reason number one, it's not good for me. Reason number two, that costs like money and stuff, but I want to eat the nacho fries. Clearly this is the most pressing issue that one can have right now.